Hello and welcome to this special Science Maroc interview with our guest, His Excellency Marwan Muasher, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Jordan, as well as former Ambassador of Jordan to the United States. It's an honor to have you here today, and we are very grateful for your time and insights. So, as President of Science Maroc and on behalf of the association, I would like to thank you for having accepted our invitation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to our moderator, Ryan, could you please share with us some highlights from your career that you think would be valuable for students who are interested in the MENA region?
Of course, I was Jordan's first ambassador to Israel right after the peace treaty between Jordan and Israel, which was the toughest job in my life. I also was ambassador to the United States during the last 6 months of King Hussein's life, which he spent in the United States. He was being treated for cancer, and I, had a chance to witness those last 6 months and the transition to King Abdullah. As foreign minister, I played a crucial role in the development of the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, and also in the Middle East roadmap that attempted to draw a roadmap for ending the Israeli occupation and the establishment of a two-state solution. And finally, I was also head of an inclusive Jordanian effort called the National Agenda to come up with a political, economic, and social reform plan for the country in 2005. These would be some highlights in my work in Jordan. I then joined the World Bank as Senior Vice President for External Affairs at the World Bank, and since 2010, I'm the Vice President of the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, in charge of the Middle East program.
Well, that certainly gives us a lot to discuss and a lot to pick from as far as diplomatic experience. And so I suppose with that in mind, having worked in the Foreign Affairs Department of Jordan in the Middle East, we'd like to get your opinion and your interpretation of the recent reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Do you think that this marks a turning point in the region?
It's certainly a major development. I would not call it a turning point until we see the results of this agreement and whether they would be permanent or not. But it's certainly a major development. The Saudis and the Iranians have not really been on good terms for a long time. I think that the Saudis, on their part, want to hedge their bets and diversify their relations, which is why they are doing this with Iran. And I think that we need to wait and see the actual translation of this agreement into actual results. I would suggest that the first sort of hanging fruit would be Yemen. If the Saudis and the Iranians are able to come to an agreement on Yemen, and there are already signs that this might be the case, the Saudis today and the Yemeni Houthis are in Oman to try to find an agreement to the conflict. I think that would, be a major development in the region. It remains to be seen whether the agreement is going to result in Iran softening its interference in the region's affairs, particularly in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon. And I'm still skeptical whether the agreement is going to do that, but we'll wait and see.
And if I could just add a second element to this question, do you think that the fact that this agreement was coordinated in large part by China marks a turning point with respect to the external relations of the Middle East?
Yes, it does. First of all, I think the United States has been receding from the region for a long time. And as a result of this, a lot of other powers are having more of an influence in the region. Russia in particular, China for sure, Iran, and to an extent also Turkey. But China has been known so far as having an economic interest, and they have poured tens of billions of dollars in the region over the last few years or decades. This is maybe the first time that China is trying to play a political role in the region, a serious political role through this agreement. And that is a sign of things to come. In other words, China appears now not to suffice with economic involvement, but also with being a political player in the region.
I suppose continuing on from that that recognition of Chinese entrance into the region, how do you view the role of the Middle East, of individual states, but also of the region collectively, in the broader multi-continental struggle that is the Sino-American tensions that have been, of course, growing over the past 2 decades?
The region is changing for sure. First of all, the Americans are no longer the only player in town. Second, the shift in the region is the power shift is going in the direction of the Gulf states. It used to be the case before that Egypt was the principal or the major player, the most important Arab country. The peace process used to dominate the issues of the region. Today, we are seeing a shift towards the Gulf states, where the Gulf states are playing increasingly a larger economic role, economic reform role. But they are also playing a larger role in diversifying their contacts, as we have said before. And you are seeing not just the Chinese playing a role, you are seeing the Israelis playing a role. And today the Abrahamic Accords are an example of a shift in relations between the Arab world and other powers, including Israel.
It's actually a perfect transition, because you mentioned in your introduction that you were the first Jordanian ambassador to Israel, which is, of course, a historic position, and of course comes with a very unique experience. But you've also shown yourself to be a supporter of regional cooperation more generally in the Middle East, and of the peaceful resolution of conflicts. And so, from your perspective, having worked in Israel and having worked extensively on this question, what do you think are the main obstacles, but also the main points of hope for peace regarding the Palestinian question?
I'm afraid that the prospects for peace, for a resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict are very dim right now. You have an Israeli government on one hand, which is not interested in ending the occupation, not interested in a two-state solution, and an Israeli government which is increasingly very radical, both on national and religious terms. You have an international community which gives lip service to the two-state solution, while not accompanying it with any meaningful plan to bring it into reality. And all that is doing is giving Israel more time to build more settlements on the ground and kill the very two-state solution that the international community wants to affect. And you have, of course, a very weak Palestinian Authority that does not enjoy anymore the support of the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian people. We are dealing today with a situation where we are actually addressing a one-state reality. It is not a solution, but we are living in a one-state reality where Israel is increasingly behaving as an apartheid state, having separate legal systems for its citizens, one for its Jewish citizens and one for its Palestinian citizens, but also separate legal systems in the areas under Israel's control in the occupied territories, one for Palestinians and one for settlers inside these territories. This is the legal definition of apartheid. It's not the emotional one. And so we are facing a situation, I think, where the question in the Arab-Israeli conflict is no longer whether we're going to have a two-state solution or not. I think that's past, that's dead. I think the question today is whether the one-state reality is going to be an apartheid state or a democratic state. And this is why, in my view, I think there has to be a shift from focusing on the shape of a solution, whether it's two states or one state or whatever, to actually adopting a rights-based approach to the conflict, saying we can no longer ignore the violation of human rights by Israelis in a process, in an Oslo process that has taken 30 years. And no matter what shape of a solution the two parties arrive at, it has to be based on equal rights, equal political as well as civil rights. If it is not based on equal rights, then it is not sustainable. And I think this is where the shift is taking place already in the occupied territories, where you have a young Palestinian generation that no longer believes that a two-state solution is possible, and a generation that no longer trusts its own leadership, the PNA, or the international community.
And in the context of what you've just said, how do you interpret the progressive rapprochement, if we can say, between certain Arab states, for example, Bahrain and Israel in the past 5-10 years?
I think it's important to realize that these are not peace agreements. The word peace does not even appear in most of these agreements. These are bilateral agreements based on mutual economic and security interests. But the international community had hoped that these agreements would soften the Israeli position, would soften the conflict, and would advance peace negotiations, which of course has not happened. Since the agreements were signed, we've witnessed a war on Gaza, we've witnessed a very radical Israeli government, we've witnessed repeated Aqsa Mosque interference by the Israeli authorities, etc. And so I think that these agreements, one, will continue maybe to pursue economic and security interests, but will not do anything to advance the peace process. And I have my doubts whether these agreements can stand in the light of what we are witnessing today, basically an Israeli government which not only is violating the rights of Palestinians, it is actually now violating the rights of large parts of its own Jewish citizens. And there is a serious internal rift among the Jewish citizens of Israel, a rift that is along maybe religious secular lines.
With that in mind, I want to turn the conversation a little bit to a different subject, which is the Arab Spring, which we are about 1 decade out from. So having witnessed the last 10 years after the Arab Spring, these major events which hit almost every country in the region, how do you interpret the movement with a little bit of distance, and how do you interpret the lessons that Arab states have learned in the wake of this movement? Have they learned lessons, and if so, have they learned the right lessons?
One, I think we need to put the Arab uprisings into their proper historical context. The departure point for me was that the status quo was not sustainable. people were living all across the Arab world in authoritarian states where governance was not exercised in any proper way, whether it is political governance or economic or social governance. And that has led to the spring. The international community expected very, very prematurely that these revolutions are going to result in democracy and prosperity immediately. And hence, they called it the Arab Spring, which was really a Western expression. It wasn't an expression that came about from the region itself. But just like any transformation process, it is going to take time. The French Revolution took almost 100 years before it settled into, a democratic form of government. All the revolutions in Europe took decades before they settled into democratic systems. So one, first of all, should not expect the Arab uprisings. I don't call them a spring yet, but the Arab uprisings, one should not expect that they turn into democracies anytime soon. But I think that the process has started, and it's going to take also decades. Unfortunately, Arab states are not learning the right lessons. The lesson that is being learned is that if you are brutal, and if you suppress the revolutions in a brutal way, then you survive. If you are soft and don't suppress it in a brutal way, then you lose. And, one can point out to Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, to Ben Ali in Tunisia, where the army, was not that brutal in suppressing the revolutions, and these guys left the scene. While in places like Syria, for example, where the Syrian regime has been very, very brutal in killing its own citizens, then of course the regime still stands. But these are, I think, last hurrahs of authoritarian governments. I think the world is changing, and certainly the Arab world, in a direction where people are demanding better governance. It's going to take a long time, and it will not be peaceful, and it will not be easy, and it will not be quick. But in the end, I think that the Arab world is no different from any other region in the world, in that it will have to move in the direction of democracy during the next decades, but not anytime soon.
I think that's a very interesting observation you've made, that this style of brutal repression, this style of government, maybe in its final phase, especially in the region. But in that context, how do you interpret what, for me, I see as a progressive rehabilitation of Syria on the international diplomatic scene? Do you see this as well? And how do you interpret the reintegration, at least, of Syria into this international process, this international scene?
I think the reintegration of Syria is not going to be quick or smooth, frankly. Not everybody wants Syria to be reintegrated under the current conditions, unless there is a serious political process that involves the opposition, because, you have 700,000 people dead in Syria, and the Syrians are not going to accept just to forget all of this and to go on with the Syrian regime as was the case before. So there has to be a process, a political process that involves the opposition as well as the government in Syria. This has been tried, of course, many, many times, and negotiations have not gone anywhere. But so far, as I said, so far as there is no serious political process that the Syrian people can feel that their uprising was not in vain, I have my doubts that the reintegration of Syria is going to go far.
Excellent. With respect to this analysis of Syria and as well this analysis of the Arab Spring more generally, do you see a future for this style of movement, or do you, as you said, do you see a more progressive phasing out of the current, or at least pre-2011, style of government in the broader Middle East region?
Of course, one cannot also talk about the Arab world as if it is monolithic, as if it is, one country where the evolutions are going to be similar. Those that understand that the old tools of governing, whether by brute force or whether by financial resources, these tools are being weakened greatly now. Oil is no longer as important as it used to be in the region. Yes, the price of oil has, risen because of the Russian-Ukraine war, but that is temporary. And so Arab states cannot use the tools of financial resources and fear of security to maintain social peace much longer. And I think they will have to transition to new tools of inclusion, of democracy, of opening up their political systems, of moving the economies of the region away from its dependence on oil to become more productive and more merit-based. These are not easy transitions, and they're not going to take place, like I said, soon at all. But this is where I think the trend is going. Either Arab states understand that they will have to employ new tools to maintain social peace. Either they do this, or I'm afraid that those who don't do this are going to face a very, very difficult future. And I cannot say that every Arab state is going to go one way or the other. But I think the examples are clear in front of us. Those that resist change, those that want to rule their countries according to 20th century tools are not going to face an easy time.
In light of that, how do you assess the last year and a half, 2 years in Tunisia, and what, according to you, are the prospects for the future of the country?
Tunisia has been a major disappointment in the last few years, because remember the first 5-6 years of Tunisia after the uprisings were very hopeful, not just for Tunisia, but for the rest of the Arab world. The Tunisians were able to arrive at a new social contract through negotiations among themselves. The secular and the religious parties found a way to coexist and deal peacefully with each other. Women rights were pushed forward to a large extent in the new constitution, so that today 32% of the Tunisian parliament is women, 41% of the judges in Tunisia are women, etc. And Tunisia has also proved through the new constitution that Islam and democracy can coexist, are not mutually exclusive. Of course, the Tunisians have not been able to solve their economic or security issues, which is why they elected a president that came from outside the system. But President Said, unfortunately, has not upheld the positive attributes of democracy that the Tunisians were able to achieve, and is now really undermining all the institutions of state, undermining parliament, undermining the judiciary. And so that is not a sustainable path for Tunisia. I keep hoping that this is a temporary path, because the Tunisians have proved that they are able, when they get together, they are able to forge a new future for themselves.
Perhaps specifically in the case of Tunisia, but more generally in the Arab world, how do you assess in 2023 the impact of Islamism as a political force or perhaps as a social force? What is its role, and does it have a role to play?
Islam, as we have witnessed it before, is on the decline. I think all ideological parties in the Arab world are on the decline. In the 20th century, the Arab world was dominated by secular parties who were leftist in nature and who promised people that Palestine, for example, would be liberated, who promised people development, etc., and which did not happen. And of course, 1967 shattered and weakened to a great extent all secular parties in the Arab world. And then Islam came as an alternative and raised the slogan, Islam is a solution. But until the Arab uprisings, Islam is a solution was not able to translate that slogan into practical programs. And so Islam as a solution was not, did not solve the unemployment problem, did not solve the debt problem, did not solve the growth problem. And today, I think we are in a vacuum in the Arab world where all the traditional political parties, political forces, whether they are political Islam or whether they are the secular parties, do not have answers for people's main challenges and aspirations. And so I think political Islam is on the decline, but so far we do not have serious third forces that have emerged and that have sort of a focus on programs, on socio-economic development, to talk about how to transition from an Arab world that is lacking on political governance and lacking on economic prosperity, how to transition to systems that are more politically open and more economically productive. That is a question that the Arab world has not solved so far.
And do you think that this question will be solved at the state level within individual states? Will there be a Jordanian solution and a Tunisian solution and an Egyptian solution? Or do you predict something resembling more of a pan-Arabist, a more regional approach to these questions?
Well, both. I mean, at one level, every country has to choose its path towards political openness, towards a political party-based political system. At the same time, there is a dire need for economic integration among Arab countries. The Arab world is a region that doesn't trade with itself. For example, only 7% of all trade is inter-regional in the Arab world, and 93% is outside the Arab world. That cannot result in any serious sustained growth. And so the answer is in both. While if every country has to choose its own path of political openness and economic liberalization, but I think as a region, it also needs to do something similar to the EU that started economic integration, 60 years ago or more, and have reached a level of development that took a long time to attain. That the Arab world needs to go through a similar process.
I want to turn now to a more specific event, a more specific situation, which is of course the World Cup in Qatar. For you, is this the the great hope for the Arab world? Is this a major step forward in the image of the region? Is this a major step forward in the opportunities economically for the region? How do you assess this event looking back on it a few months?
It's an interesting question, but you are right. The World Cup taught us some lessons that went beyond football in Qatar. First, it taught us a lesson on what an Arab country can achieve if it does things professionally and well. And it sort of, it did a lot to erase the image of unprofessionalism in the Arab world, of a region that does not have a high work ethic, etc. The other point was regarding the Israeli conflict. I mean, the Abrahamic Accords gave the impression that the Gulf, is satisfied with these agreements. But when you looked at the ordinary people's reactions, they were far different than the official position regarding Israel. So that's another lesson that needed to be looked at. And then there is the issue of Islamophobia. I think that Western coverage of Qatar took at times, of course, we cannot generalize, but took at times a clear anti-Islamic tone, which was different than when the World Cup was done in other countries that were also seen as authoritarian. So a lot of questions to internalize for sure.
And do you think that during the World Cup, the success of the Moroccan national team gave the Arab world something to unite behind, something like a glance at a future?
Without doubt. And this is what I was referring to when I talked about professionalism. It is not just the organization of the World Cup, but Morocco proved that with hard work, with serious plans, with discipline, that things can be achieved at this level. This is, of course, the first time ever that an Arab country makes it to the finals. And it actually, I hope that people will not forget what Morocco was able to do in Qatar, that people will always look at it as an example of how to do things the right way in the Arab world.
I want to come back a little bit to what you said at the beginning. You listed some major events in your career, and all of them, I think, deserve to be looked into further, to be expanded upon. But we wanted to know, as students of international affairs, as students of diplomacy, do you have any advice for us, especially in 2023, in the 21st century, looking at the direction of these fields of the international stage? Do you have points that we should concentrate on, something to certainly focus on in our studies?
Well, I think the world of political science and political issues is getting more complicated and more open with the advent of technology, with the with countries getting and issues getting more in the open than before. The advice that I would give is, one, students of politics should always keep an open mind. Truths are never absolute. They are always relative. And so you need to read a lot. You need to understand the different perspectives on any one issue. One cannot just lock himself or herself into into a very rigid frame of mind without being able to look at what other points of view are. One needs to be creative. One needs to be a really good listener. Listening is a very important part of diplomacy and of political issues. And one has to be disciplined in your field, in our field. There is so much information, and you need to be able to, capture a lot of what is going on in the world. But you need to have discipline to allow you to do that, because of course one cannot know about everything and read about everything. At the same time, one cannot also not be aware of what is going on outside. So you need to build a system of information that provides you with constant information, but also provides you with a diverse set of information that allows your mind to grow and allows you to have well-rounded view of the world and not just another one.
And I suppose if you could add something to this, just given the nature of our campus and the nature of our studies, are there any specificities? Is there anything really key that we should know for diplomatic work as far as it concerns the Middle East, the Arab region, the Muslim world?
Well, have an open mind. I've dealt with science post students often. I just addressed a group that came to Jordan last month. So, being able to see things on the ground, being able to travel, talk to people, talk to officials from different perspectives in the Arab world. Of course, we have many different perspectives. You have the Israeli perspective, you have the Arab perspective, you have the authoritarian perspective, you have the democratic perspective. It can be extremely complicated. So the ability to keep an open mind and to learn as much as you can about the issues of the Middle East is crucial. Those who approach it with one view only that is not open to change are not going to do well, in my view.
And again, taking into account the list of achievements, the list of events that you've taken part in your career, which is truly extensive, do you have a favorite achievement or a highest achievement, something that you could share with us, truly the peak of your career?
Well, I'm very proud of the reform effort that I chaired in 2005 to present the country with a political, social, and economic reform process for the next 10 years. I'm proud of it because it was done, in my view, the right way, in an inclusive manner that had all the different political and economic forces and social forces in the country get together. I'm proud because it provided a roadmap that, if implemented, would have put Jordan really in a far different position than when we are today. So that's an effort that I really am proud of. I'm proud that I, even though was the Minister of Information in Jordan, but led an effort to abolish the ministry, because I don't believe in central monitoring of information for citizens. And so I led that effort, which eventually succeeded in abolishing the Ministry of Information in Jordan. These are only two. I'm proud of the free trade agreement that when I was ambassador in Washington, we pushed with the United States, and I, as ambassador, led the lobbying effort for that agreement. which was the first agreement between the United States and an Arab country, and only the fourth agreement in the world between the United States and any country. These are some of the efforts that I'm really proud of.
They're all truly incredible, and I think that there are lessons in there for all of us as students of diplomacy and of international relations to glean. With that said, we thank you extensively, Your Excellency Mr. Muasher, for your time on behalf of Sciences Maroc and on behalf of the students of Sciences Po, who I think will undoubtedly benefit from the wisdom and the experience shared during this interview. Again, my colleagues and I, we thank you extensively. For me, your analysis of the geopolitical situations presented, given your knowledge, given your experience, was enormously valuable for us as students and for observers of the world around us. However, I think that above all, the lessons gleaned from such a distinguished career, which you were so generous to share with us, bring us a truly unique perspective and value. So, of course, we thank you sincerely for your time today, and we hope to maintain communication for the future. It has been a pleasure to speak with you. And again, we look forward to any possible opportunity to do so in the future.
Thank you. I truly appreciate that. I appreciate the effort that you and Azzedine have initiated. I look forward, hopefully, to visiting you on campus at some point also.
We would be happy to assist with that as well. That would be an honor, a pleasure.